At dinner, my dad declared, "Your sister is accomplished and dependable, not like you." He added, "She doesn't rely on anyone." I answered calmly, "Great." Then my $3,500 monthly payment stopped today. The golden child instantly panicked. My father's words hit me like a gut punch. "Your sister is successful and responsible, unlike you." He had no idea I was the one secretly bankrolling her entire fake life. And that night, something inside me finally snapped. I'm Braden, 32, and for over 2 years, I'd been sending my younger sister, Rachel, $3,500 every single month. Nobody knew, just us. My dad's comment that evening, delivered with such pride for Rachel and disdain for me, was the last straw. Years of being the less favored child had trained me to stay calm. But when he then declared Rachel didn't need help from anyone, that's when I knew everything was about to change. Growing up in suburban Boston, our two-story colonial on Maple Street looked perfect from the outside, just like our family tried to appear. My dad, Greg, was a stern financial advisor, obsessed with success measured in promotions and dollar signs. He wore crisp suits even on weekends, always with an air of superiority. It intimidated most people, and especially me. My mom, Elaine, was the peacekeeper, always smoothing things over, making excuses for Dad's harsh criticisms. She was kind, but honestly, too passive. She rarely stood up to him, even when he was clearly wrong. Then there was Rachel, my sister, 3 years younger. From the moment she was born, she had this special knack for charming people. She was outgoing, socially gifted, always the center of attention. Adults would marvel at her confidence while I stood awkwardly, preferring computers to conversations. What no one seemed to notice was how Rachel manipulated situations. As a kid, she'd break something, then somehow convince everyone I did it. She'd forget her homework and end up borrowing mine. Behind that charming smile was a pattern of irresponsibility our parents, especially Dad, just refused to see. "Braden, why can't you be more like your sister?" That became the soundtrack of my childhood. I'd bring home a report card with all A's and one B, and Dad would fixate on the B. Rachel would bring home B's and C's, and he'd praise her effort, her potential. The double standard was so painfully obvious to everyone but him. Despite it all, I was determined to prove myself through hard work. While other kids played video games, I taught myself programming. Our home computer became my sanctuary, a place where I could create and solve problems without judgment. By 13, I'd built my first basic website. By 16, I was helping local businesses with their IT needs for extra money. Dad called it playing with computers and insisted I focus on real subjects like math and economics. High school was tough, not academically, but socially. Rachel was homecoming queen, dating the quarterback. I found my tribe in the computer lab with other tech enthusiasts. We were nerds, but I didn't care. With them, I could be myself, talk about coding and emerging tech, without getting that glazed-over look my family always gave me. College brought new struggles. Rachel got a full ride to Cornell, thanks to Dad's alumni connections. Me? I went to State University, working part-time in the campus IT department to cover expenses. Dad made it clear my education was less of a priority for family finances. "Rachel has real potential," he'd say, as if I didn't. I graduated with a degree in computer science, a minor in business, and $20,000 in student debt. That Rachel never had to worry about. My first tech job paid modestly, but I lived frugally, spending evenings and weekends on my own projects. Dad called it wasting time on pipe dreams when I tried to explain my ideas for a startup, an AI system to automate customer service for small businesses. 2 years after graduation, I took the biggest risk of my life. I quit my stable job and launched my startup with my college roommate, Mason, and our friend, Derek. We worked out of my tiny apartment, fueled by ramen and pure determination. The first 6 months were brutal. No income, dwindling savings, and Dad's constant reminders that I was making a huge mistake. Rachel just got promoted at her marketing firm, he'd announced during family dinners, looking pointedly at me. What he didn't know was Rachel had been fired from that firm 3 months earlier. She'd confided in me one night, after too many drinks, swearing me to secrecy, asking for a temporary loan until she found a new job. Being the big brother who always looked out for her, despite everything, I agreed. I sent her $1,500 for rent. That temporary arrangement somehow became permanent and eventually increased to $3,500 monthly. Rachel always had a new reason. A promised job fell through, a roommate moved out unexpectedly, her car needed repairs. Each time, I transferred the money, telling myself it was just until she got stable. Meanwhile, my startup slowly gained traction. We secured our first major client, then several more. We hired 2 employees, then 5, then 12. We moved into a real office. But at family gatherings, my achievements were footnotes. Rachel's fabricated career success took center stage. She'd become an expert at telling our parents exactly what they wanted to hear, all while privately depending on my monthly transfers to maintain her illusion. I didn't mind helping my sister, but it really bothered me that she continued the charade instead of being honest with our parents. What bothered me even more was that despite my growing business success, Dad still saw me as the disappointing child who couldn't measure up to his golden daughter. But I kept quiet, transferred the money, and focused on my business. Family peace seemed worth the price, until that fateful dinner changed everything. The 3 years leading up to that dinner were transformative for my business. What started as a scrappy idea in my apartment evolved into Respond AI, a company with 48 employees and a downtown office. Our customer service automation platform was being used by over 200 businesses across the country. Our AI could understand context and emotion in customer inquiries, a true game changer. Tech blogs were featuring us, investment offers were rolling in. This was legitimate, life-changing success. Through all this, I kept supporting Rachel financially. Every month, like clockwork, $3,500 moved from my account to hers. Initially, I hadn't questioned it deeply. Family helps family, right? But as months turned into years, things started to bother me. Rachel's Instagram told a story that didn't align with someone struggling financially. There she was at a luxury resort in Cabo. There was the designer purse she treated herself to. Her new apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Each post was captioned with vague, inspirational quotes about manifesting success, carefully constructed to suggest she was thriving without explicitly claiming any specific achievements. When I gently asked about these expenses, Rachel always had ready explanations. The Cabo trip was mostly covered by a friend's points. The purse was a knockoff. The apartment was a sublet with a surprisingly good deal. She'd become adept at maintaining 2 narratives: the successful professional for our parents and social media, and the struggling victim who needed her brother's help when we spoke privately. My suspicions grew when I ran into Marcus, Rachel's former coworker, at a tech networking event. He mentioned being surprised Rachel had left the industry entirely after her stint at the marketing firm. I thought she was pursuing real estate now, he said casually, unaware that, according to Rachel's stories to our parents, she was currently a senior marketing manager at a top agency. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. I searched her name on LinkedIn. Her profile hadn't been updated in over 2 years. A deeper Google search revealed no professional footprint for someone supposedly climbing the corporate ladder. The evidence was mounting. Rachel's entire career success was fabricated. Still, confronting her directly was difficult. When I tried to approach the subject during our monthly coffee meetup, she burst into tears, talking about her anxiety, how hard she was trying but kept hitting obstacles. She promised she was close to landing something big that would finally let her stand on her own feet. Like many times before, I backed off, transferred the money, and hoped she was being truthful. What Rachel didn't know was that supporting her was becoming increasingly stressful for me. While my business was growing, we were reinvesting heavily in development and expansion. There were months when I paid my employees before paying myself. Months when I dipped into my personal savings to make sure Rachel got her money on time. I never told her about these sacrifices because I didn't want her to feel worse. But the situation was becoming unsustainable. Throughout this period, Dad continued to be my harshest critic. During family gatherings, he'd question my business decisions, suggest I should have pursued a real career in finance like him, and compare my modest lifestyle to Rachel's apparent success. "Your sister just closed a huge marketing deal with that national clothing brand," he'd boast. Information clearly from Rachel and clearly untrue. Mom noticed my discomfort, but maintained her peacekeeper role. Once, when we were alone, She squeezed my arm and said, "Your father just wants what's best for you both. He expresses it poorly sometimes." This well-intentioned defense only made me feel more isolated in recognizing our family's dysfunction. 3 weeks before the dinner, two significant things happened. First, my company secured a major investment deal. It was a national scaling opportunity, legitimate life-changing success that even Dad wouldn't be able to diminish. Second, Rachel called, asking for an additional $2,000 on top of her usual transfer for an emergency she was vague about. This time, instead of immediately agreeing, I asked for details. The conversation quickly turned hostile. Rachel accused me of not caring, bringing up childhood incidents where I'd supposedly failed her. Her manipulation tactics were so transparent, so infuriating, that something finally clicked. This wasn't helping her. This was enabling a pattern that was hurting both of us. I transferred the money one last time, but I made a decision. This situation needed to change. I spent the next few weeks gathering evidence. Bank statements showing the regular transfers, screenshots of her social media posts displaying her lavish lifestyle, notes from our conversations where she'd admitted lying to our parents. I wasn't sure exactly how or when I'd use this, but I needed to be prepared. Then came Mom's text. Dad's excited to hear about Rachel's promotion. Unknowingly, she'd provided the perfect opening. I confirmed my attendance, mentally preparing for what would likely be the most difficult family conversation of my life. The night before, I barely slept. Part of me wanted to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. But a stronger part knew that real family relationships couldn't be built on lies and manipulation. With my folder of evidence in my briefcase and determination in my heart, I drove to my parents' house, knowing this dinner would be unlike any we'd had before. My parents' house looked exactly as it had for the past 20 years, impeccably maintained, pristine lawn, a seasonal wreath on the front door. Dad's Mercedes and Mom's Volvo sat in the driveway like sentinels guarding the perfect suburban image we'd always projected. I parked my Tesla Model 3 behind them, a modest luxury I'd finally allowed myself. The car represented my success, but I already knew Dad would find a way to minimize it. "Leasing, son?" he'd asked when I first drove it home, unable to believe I could afford to buy it outright. Mom answered the door, apron on, wooden spoon in hand. "Brayden, right on time," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of garlic and rosemary. "I'm making your favorite pot roast." The familiar smell of home brought conflicting emotions. Despite everything, I loved my parents, our traditions. Part of me still craved their approval, even as another part prepared to potentially damage our relationship forever with the truth. Dad was in his usual spot, glasses perched on his nose, reviewing financial documents. He looked up briefly. "Son," he acknowledged with a nod, then returned to his papers. No hug, no questions about my drive. His emotional distance had been so constant my whole life, I barely noticed it anymore. "How's work, Dad?" I asked, settling into an armchair. "Can't complain. Johnston account's giving me some trouble, but nothing I can't handle." He set his papers aside and finally looked at me. "And your computer thing? Still keeping the lights on?" This dismissive reference to my thriving tech company would have stung more if I hadn't been expecting it. "Actually, we just closed a major investment round. 7 figures. We're expanding to 3 new markets next quarter." For a brief moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise, perhaps even a hint of respect, before his expression returned to neutral. "Well, that's something. Risky, though. Taking on investors. They'll want control. Should have talked to me." Mom called from the kitchen, saving me from having to respond. "Greg, fix Brayden one of your gin and tonics." Drinks in hand, we made surface-level conversation. Mom flitted between kitchen and living room, filling silences with weather updates and neighborhood gossip. I answered politely, feeling the weight of my evidence folder by the door. At 6:30, 30 minutes after scheduled dinner, the front door swung open without a knock. Rachel breezed in, a gust of expensive perfume and chaotic energy. "Sorry I'm late, family. Client meeting ran long, couldn't be helped." She wore a new designer blazer I recognized from an Instagram post, approximately $2,000, the same amount as her emergency request. Dad immediately perked up, setting his drink aside to stand and embrace her. "There's my girl. Don't you look successful?" The pride in his voice was unmistakable, The same tone I'd spent 32 years trying and failing to elicit. Rachel's performance was flawless. She kissed both parents, complimented Mom's outfit, and asked Dad detailed questions about his work that she knew would please him. When she finally acknowledged me with a quick side hug, she whispered, "Thanks for the extra help this month," before pulling away to accept the wine Mom offered. During appetizers, a cheese plate with varieties I'd introduced, but Mom still credited Rachel with discovering. My sister dominated the conversation with carefully crafted stories. Pitch meetings with clients who didn't exist, fictional colleagues, projects that never happened. I watched my parents hang on every word, their faces glowing with pride. "So, enough about my boring work stuff," Rachel finally said, taking a deliberate sip of wine. "The real exciting news is my promotion. Junior VP of Client Relations." Mom gasped with delight. Dad reached over to squeeze Rachel's shoulder. "That's my daughter. Always knew you'd climb the ladder faster than most." "Congratulations," I said, meeting her eyes directly. "Which agency is this with again? You move around so much, I lose track." A flash of panic crossed her face before she recovered. "Still with Madison Avenue Group, Bray. Been there almost a year now." The agency existed, but I knew from my research they had no record of employing a Rachel Henderson. "Impressive," I continued, my tone neutral. "Junior VP after less than a year. They must really value your work." "They do," Rachel said, suddenly very interested in rearranging her silverware. "I brought in the Luxe Cosmetics account last month. 7 figures." Dad beamed. "That's how it's done, son. Building relationships, making real connections with clients, not just hiding behind computers all day." Mom quickly interjected, "Dinner's ready. Let's move to the dining room." Clearly sensing the tension, we relocated to the formal dining room, reserved for special occasions, with its cherrywood table and my grandmother's china. As we passed serving dishes, Dad continued praising Rachel's career. "Junior VP at 29, that's practically unheard of in marketing. Faster than Parker's daughter. And they own the damn company," he chuckled. "Must be doing something right. Paying all those student loans off already, too." This was news to me. Rachel had confided months ago that she'd stopped making payments on her loans, using forbearance options while directing her income, or rather, my transfers, toward her lifestyle. "You paid off your student loans?" I asked, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. Rachel shot me a warning look. "Almost. Just a few more payments." "Good for you," Dad said firmly, as if daring me to question further. "Responsibility. That's what I like to see. No shortcuts." The irony was almost painful. I had paid my own student loans off 2 years earlier through actual hard work and business success, but Dad had barely acknowledged it. Rachel was being praised for fictional financial responsibility while being bankrolled by her brother. As dinner progressed, I grew increasingly quiet, the folder of evidence in my briefcase calling to me like a siren. Mom noticed. "Braden, tell us more about your company's expansion. That sounds exciting." Before I could answer, Dad interjected. "Let's not bore Rachel with all that technical talk. She's had a long day of actual meetings with actual people." He laughed as if he'd made a clever joke. That's when I saw it. The slight smirk on Rachel's face as she took a sip of wine. Not embarrassment for me, not discomfort with Dad's rudeness, but satisfaction. My sister was enjoying this dynamic, this imbalance that had defined our family for decades. Something shifted inside me. The conversation continued around me, but I was suddenly certain about what I needed to do. The truth needed to come out, not just for me, but for all of us, trapped in roles that had long stopped serving any healthy purpose. I excused myself to use the bathroom, stopping by my briefcase on the way to retrieve the folder. With the manila envelope tucked discreetly under my arm, I returned to the dining table just as Mom was serving dessert, apple pie with vanilla ice cream. Another family tradition that suddenly felt hollow. Rachel was mid-story about a business trip to Chicago that I knew hadn't happened when Dad put down his fork and made the announcement that would change everything. "You know," Dad said, swirling the remainder of his wine, "I've been thinking a lot lately about you 2 kids and how differently you've turned out." He set his glass down with deliberate precision. "Your sister is successful and responsible, unlike you, Braden." The table fell silent. Even Rachel seemed surprised by the directness of his attack. though I caught the slight upward curve of her lips before she arranged her face into a more appropriate expression of discomfort. Dad continued, warming to his theme. Rachel has always understood the value of traditional career paths, of making connections with real people instead of hiding behind technology. Look at her. Junior VP already, respected in her industry, financially independent. Mom placed her hand on his arm. Greg, maybe this isn't the time. He shrugged her off. No, Elaine, they're adults. We can speak plainly. He turned back to me. Son, I've tried to guide you towards sensible choices your whole life, but you insisted on your own path. That's your right. But don't expect me to pretend your sister hasn't made objectively better decisions. I sat perfectly still, feeling a strange calm descend over me. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for without realizing it. Rachel stands on her own 2 feet, Dad declared with finality. She doesn't need help from anyone. That's the difference between you two. Always has been. The folder sat heavy in my lap as I looked directly into my father's eyes. Perfect, I said quietly. My $3,500 monthly transfers to Rachel end today. The words landed like a bomb. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. Mom froze with her water glass halfway to her lips. And Rachel? Rachel's face drained of all color. What are you talking about? Dad demanded, looking between us. Rachel recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. Braden's just being dramatic. He helped me with rent once or twice when I was between jobs last year, making it sound like some ongoing thing. I opened the folder and placed the first bank statement on the table. 2 years and 4 months of transfers, every month, without fail. $3,500 from my account to Rachel's. Dad stared at the statement, then grabbed it to examine more closely, his financial advisor instincts kicking in despite his shock. This could be for anything. Business arrangement, loan repayment. I placed another statement on the table, then another, and another. A steady rhythm of evidence spanning back over 2 years. There's more, I said calmly. Text messages where Rachel admits lying to you about her career. Screenshots of her social media showing purchases made with my money while claiming financial hardship to me. Rachel's composure cracked entirely. He's twisting things. Yes, he helped me sometimes, but not like he's making it sound. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and slid it across the table. Check the transaction history yourself, Dad. You're the financial expert. Tell me what you see. His hands trembled slightly as he took the phone, his face darkening as he scrolled through month after month of identical transfers. This is absurd, he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Rachel, explain this. My sister's eyes darted between us, calculating her best move. She opted for tears, a strategy that had served her well throughout our childhood. I was going to pay him back, she sobbed. It was just temporary until my career stabilized. Braden offered to help. I didn't ask him to. Actually, you did. I corrected gently, pulling out printed copies of text messages. Here's where you asked for $1,500 initially. Here's where you requested an increase to $2,500. And here, just 3 months ago, where you pushed it to $3,500. Mom had her hands over her mouth, tears in her eyes. Rachel, is this true? Have you been lying to us about your job? Rachel's sobs intensified, but she didn't answer directly. You don't understand how hard it's been for me. The pressure to live up to your expectations. Dad was still scrolling through my banking history, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, I expected anger. But what I saw instead was something I rarely witnessed on my father's face, confusion. But you told us you were junior VP, he said to Rachel, his voice unnaturally quiet. You said you closed the Lux account last month. I'm on track for that promotion, Rachel amended between sobs. And we're pitching to Lux next quarter. I was just anticipating success. Lying, I translated. The word you're looking for is lying, Rachel. That's enough, Braden. Dad snapped, defaulting to his protective stance toward Rachel despite the evidence. Clearly, there's been some miscommunication. No, Dad, there hasn't. I felt strangely liberated speaking truth after years of silence. Rachel hasn't held a steady job in over 2 years. She was fired from Patterson Marketing for missing deadlines and has been bouncing between temporary positions and unemployment since then. Meanwhile, she's been presenting herself as a rising star to you and Mom, while depending on me financially to maintain the illusion. Mom finally found her voice. I suspected something wasn't right, she admitted quietly. The details of her stories never quite added up, but I never imagined. She trailed off, looking at Rachel with profound disappointment. Rachel's tears suddenly stopped as she shifted tactics. Fine. Yes, I've struggled professionally. But Braden didn't have to support me. He chose to. And now he's throwing it in my face to make himself look better. That's what this is really about, isn't it, Bray? You're jealous that Mom and Dad have always loved me more. The raw truth of her statement hung in the air. Dad flinched visibly. Mom looked stricken. That's not true. Dad protested weakly. We've never played favorites. I laughed then, a genuine laugh born from the absurdity of his denial. Dad, you literally just announced at this table that Rachel is successful and responsible, unlike me. You've been playing favorites our entire lives. I've just been harder on you because you expected more from me. Because you were pushing me to succeed. Save the excuses. I was surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The truth is, I have succeeded beyond anything you've acknowledged. My computer thing is now a multi-million-dollar company with almost 50 employees. I've paid off my student loans, bought a home, and somehow managed to support your golden child for over 2 years without anyone noticing. Rachel made a last desperate attempt. I was going to tell you both everything once I got back on my feet. Braden's making it sound so calculated, but I've just been going through a rough patch. A 2-year rough patch funded by your brother. Mom pointed out, her peacekeeper role finally giving way to parental accountability. While we've been praising you and criticizing him, Dad sat back in his chair, the evidence before him impossible to deny, but clearly difficult to accept. His worldview, with Rachel as the successful, responsible child and me as the disappointing dreamer, was crumbling before his eyes. Why didn't you tell us you were struggling, Rachel? He asked, his voice softer than I'd expected. Because you've always expected perfection. Rachel burst out. Do you know how terrifying it is to be your successful child? Any failure feels catastrophic. It was the first honest thing she'd said all night. And despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy. Our father's expectations had damaged us both, just in different ways. And you, Dad. He turned to me, struggling to reconcile his perception with reality. Why would you enable this deception? Why support her secretly instead of coming to us? Would you have believed me over Rachel? I asked simply. In 32 years, when has my word ever outweighed hers in this family? His silence was answer enough. I stood up, gathering the evidence back into my folder. I'm not doing this to hurt anyone, but I'm done being the family scapegoat while financing the golden child's fake success story. Rachel needs to stand on her own feet for real this time. And you both need to see us for who we actually are, not who you've decided we should be. Braden, please. Rachel reached for my arm, panic in her eyes. I can't afford my apartment without your help. Where am I supposed to go? You might start by getting an actual job, I suggested. Or downsizing to an apartment you can afford on your own income. You know, basic adult responsibilities. You can't just cut me off completely. Her voice rose shrilly. After everything we've been through as siblings, I'm not your parent, Rachel. I'm your brother. I've been enabling a destructive pattern, and it stops tonight. Dad finally found his footing. Now wait just a minute. You can't just drop this bomb and walk out. We need to discuss this as a family. Despite the evidence, he was still trying to regain control. We've been discussing it for approximately 30 minutes, I replied, which is about 29 minutes longer than you've ever spent considering my perspective on anything. I think we're done for tonight. I picked up my briefcase and headed for the door, feeling lighter than I had in years, despite the chaos erupting behind me. If you walk out that door, you're choosing to fracture this family. Dad called after me, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone that had intimidated me for decades. I turned back one last time. No, Dad. The fractures have been there all along. I'm just finally refusing to keep pretending they don't exist. As I closed the front door behind me, I could hear Rachel's renewed sobs and Mom's attempts at comfort. Dad remained silent. For the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my complete truth to my family. And while the immediate aftermath was painful, I felt the first stirrings of hope that something healthier might eventually grow from this necessary, bitter destruction. The drive home that night was surreal. Streetlights blurred as I replayed the dinner confrontation. Part of me was in shock at my own actions. I had actually done it. After years of silent compliance, I had finally exposed the truth and stood my ground. Another part felt a strange mixture of liberation and grief. Family systems, even dysfunctional ones, provide a kind of security in their predictability. I had just shattered ours beyond repair. My phone started buzzing incessantly before I even reached my driveway. Rachel's name flashed repeatedly, interspersed with texts. How could you do this to me? I'm going to be evicted. Call me back right now. You've ruined everything. I silenced the phone, went inside, poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey, and sat in the darkness of my living room. The confrontation had been necessary, but that didn't make the aftermath any easier to bear. By morning, my voicemail was full. Rachel had called 17 times, Mom 6, and even Dad had left a message, something practically unprecedented. I wasn't ready to engage yet, so I showered, dressed, and headed to the office as if it were a normal day. My business partner, Mason, took one look at my face and ushered me into our conference room. You finally told them, didn't you? He asked, closing the door. Mason was one of the few people who knew about my financial support of Rachel and had been encouraging me to end it for months. I nodded, giving him an abbreviated version of the previous night's events. About damn time, he said, squeezing my shoulder. How are you holding up? Honestly, I don't know yet. Somewhere between relieved and terrified. That tracks. Look, take the day if you need it. The Harrison proposal can wait. I shook my head. Work is exactly what I need right now. Normalcy. Purpose. Around noon, my office phone rang. It was Mom, calling from her landline, knowing I might be avoiding cell calls. I picked up after a brief internal debate. Braden. Her voice was tight, suggesting she'd been crying. Please don't hang up. I'm here, Mom. What happened last night? She began, then faltered. Your father and I had no idea about the money, about Rachel's job situation, about any of it. I know you didn't, I said, softening slightly at the genuine distress in her voice. Rachel stayed here last night. It's been difficult. She admitted everything after you left. Well, most things. Your father is. She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. He's processing. Translation. Dad was still finding ways to justify Rachel's behavior and minimize mine. Some patterns don't break in a single night. I owe you an apology, Mom continued. I've always known your father was harder on you, and I told myself it was just his way of pushing you toward success. I should have intervened more. I should have seen what was happening. The acknowledgement loosened something tight in my chest. Thank you for saying that. Will you come over this weekend? Just you and me. Your father's taking Rachel to see a financial advisor to sort out her situation. I think we need to talk, just us. I agreed, slightly surprised by my mother's initiative in arranging this conversation away from Dad's influence. Maybe I wasn't the only one experiencing a shift in our family dynamic. The next 48 hours brought a series of increasingly desperate communications from Rachel. Text messages oscillated between rage. You've always been jealous of me. Manipulation. Dad's so disappointed in you. Self-pity. I'm having panic attacks because of what you did. And finally, bargaining. What if we reduced it to $1,500? Just until I find something stable. I responded only once. I care about you, but this arrangement is over. I'm happy to help review your resume or practice interviews if you want actual assistance moving forward. Her reply was a single middle finger emoji. Dad's communication was more measured but equally revealing. His voicemail, left at 11:23 p.m. the night after the dinner, had a slight slur, suggesting he'd been drinking, something he rarely did to excess. Son, I think you've misinterpreted a lot of things over the years. My expectations for you were always different because you're different from your sister, more capable in many ways. I pushed you harder because you could handle it. I'm not saying Rachel hasn't made mistakes. Clearly, she has. But exposing family matters this way, there were better approaches. Call me when you're ready to discuss this rationally. Even in the face of irrefutable evidence, he was recasting his favoritism as a compliment, twisting reality to maintain his self-image as a fair father who had always acted in our best interests. The cognitive dissonance was almost impressive. 3 days after the dinner, Rachel showed up at my office unannounced. My assistant, Diana, tried to intercept her, but Rachel pushed past, barging into my meeting with potential investors. I need to speak with my brother. It's a family emergency, she announced to the room. The professional mask I'd maintained for days slipped as I excused myself and practically dragged Rachel into an empty office. What are you doing? These people are considering a $2 million investment in my company. Rachel's eyes were red-rimmed, her usually immaculate appearance noticeably disheveled. My landlord called. Without this month's payment, I'm out by the 15th. Dad's financial advisor says I need to declare bankruptcy because of my credit card debt. My whole life is imploding, and you're in here making millions. The unfairness of her perspective was staggering. Rachel, I've supported you for over 2 years while building this business. I've given you over $80,000 that you've spent on luxury items and vacations while lying to our parents about your success. And now you're interrupting my actual work to demand more. You don't understand what it's like. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You've always been the smart one, the one who could actually do things. I've just been pretending my whole life. The admission stunned me into momentary silence. Behind Rachel's tears, I glimpsed something I'd never fully appreciated. My sister was terrified. Beneath the manipulation and entitlement was a profound insecurity that mirrored my own, just expressed differently. Rachel, I said more gently, that's exactly why this needs to stop. The pretending, the lying. You're trapped in this cycle that's preventing you from finding out who you actually are and what you're capable of. But I need more time, she pleaded. Just a few more months of support while I get things figured out. I promise I'll be honest with Mom and Dad from now on. I shook my head. No, the financial support is over. But I'm still your brother, and I'll help you in other ways if you're serious about making changes. Her face hardened as she realized I wouldn't be swayed. You know what? Dad's right about you. You've always been selfish, always had to prove you're better than everyone. Enjoy your precious company and your moral high ground. I'll figure this out without you. She stormed out, leaving me shaken, but still resolved. The meeting with the investors was salvaged, but the interaction with Rachel haunted me throughout the day. That weekend, I went to my parents' house as promised, to speak with Mom alone. She welcomed me with a tight hug and led me to the back porch with a pot of coffee. For the first time in my memory, she seemed to have aged, the stress of the family upheaval evident in new lines around her eyes. Rachel's staying in your old room for now, she said, pouring coffee into Dad's Princeton mug, an unconscious habit of giving me the less preferred items that spoke volumes about our family's ingrained patterns. I nodded, unsurprised that Rachel had moved back home rather than downsized. How's that going? It's an adjustment. Mom sighed heavily. She's angry at you primarily, but also at us for not protecting her, whatever that means. Your father is. She hesitated. Still taking her side. I suggested. He's trying not to, she said, which was more acknowledgement of his bias than I'd ever heard from her. Finding out about the money and the job lies shook him deeply, but old habits die hard, and Rachel knows exactly which buttons to push with him. We sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee and listening to birds. Can I ask you something? Mom finally said. Why did you do it? Support her all that time without saying anything? I considered the question carefully. At first, it really was just to help her through a rough patch. But then it became, I don't know, evidence. I looked down at my coffee. Evidence that I was capable of taking care of others. That I was successful enough to support myself and help my sister. That despite Dad's constant criticism and doubt, I had built something meaningful. And maybe part of me thought that if I ever revealed the truth, it would finally force Dad to see me clearly. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. I failed you as a mother, haven't I? By not standing up to your father's favoritism. We've all been playing our assigned roles for a long time, I said. I'm as guilty as anyone. I could have spoken up years ago instead of enabling the dynamic. Well, we're speaking now. She squeezed my hand. And for what it's worth, I've always seen you clearly, Brayden. I've always been proud of your integrity and determination, even when I didn't say it enough. Her words soothed a wound I hadn't fully acknowledged was still open. As I was leaving, Dad's car pulled into the driveway. For a moment, I considered hurrying to my car to avoid him, but decided against it. Running away wouldn't solve anything. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets. Brayden, he said with a stiff nod. Dad, we stood awkwardly on the front walk. Decades of unspoken tension between us. Your mother tells me your company's doing well, he said finally. The AI thing. It is. He nodded again, looking past me rather than at me. Good. That's good. It wasn't an apology or even a real acknowledgement of the situation, but from my father, it was something, a tiny crack in his armor of certainty, A small step towards seeing me as I actually was rather than as he'd decided I should be. Thanks, Dad, I said, and got in my car. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw him still standing there, watching me leave. A man confronting, perhaps for the first time, the possibility that the story he'd been telling himself about his family had never been the true one at all. The weeks following the dinner confrontation unfolded like the aftermath of a storm. Destruction visible everywhere, but also the first tentative signs of new growth emerging from the cleared ground. My phone became a battleground of competing narratives. Rachel alternated between angry tirades and tearful pleas, with occasional periods of silence that I learned coincided with Dad taking her side in family discussions. Mom sent daily text updates that read like field reports from a war zone. Dad and Rachel argued about her job search efforts this morning. Or Rachel is meeting with a credit counselor tomorrow. Your father finally insisted. My business partner, Mason, became an unexpected source of support during this time. Having witnessed my stress over the family situation for years, he took on extra work to give me space when needed. Family stuff is harder than any business challenge, he said one evening as we worked late. Companies have clear metrics for success. Families just have generations of emotional baggage. 10 days after the confrontation, I received a text from Rachel that stood out from her others. Can we meet for coffee? Just us. No drama, I promise. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a cafe halfway between my office and our parents' house. I arrived early, half expecting her not to show, but she walked in precisely on time, looking more put together than when she'd burst into my office, but less polished than her usual Instagram-ready self. Thanks for coming, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, as if seeking warmth despite the mild spring day. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I nodded, but remained silent, waiting for her to continue. I'm angry at you, she admitted, meeting my eyes directly. But I'm also angry at myself, and at Mom and Dad, and this whole situation. It's making me look at things I've been avoiding for a long time. It was perhaps the most honest I'd ever heard her sound. Like what? I asked cautiously. She took a deep breath. Like the fact that I've been lying about my career because I'm terrified of failing. Like the way I've used Dad's favoritism as a crutch instead of developing actual skills. Like how I've been jealous of you for as long as I can remember. Jealous of me? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Rachel, Dad's been holding you up as the golden standard my entire life. Because I performed the role he wants, she said with unexpected insight. But you've actually built something real on your terms. Do you know how terrifying that is to watch when you're someone who's only good at playing parts other people write for you? The conversation shifted into territory we'd never explored before, our shared childhood, but viewed through drastically different lenses. Where I had seen the favorite child who could do no wrong, she had experienced crushing pressure to maintain a perfect facade. Where she had seen the rebel who defied expectations, I had lived as the overlooked son, desperate for recognition. I'm not saying I haven't manipulated situations, Rachel acknowledged. I have, and I'm trying to be honest about that. The money from you became, I don't know, proof that someone believed in me even when I was failing, which is messed up. I realize that now. Have you talked to Dad like this? I asked. She gave a hollow laugh. Trying to. He's struggling. His whole worldview got upended, you know? Finding out his successful daughter has been unemployed and lying while his underachieving son has been supporting her. It's like watching someone's brain short-circuit in real time. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy for our father. The stories we tell ourselves about our lives are powerful things, and having them suddenly invalidated is a kind of psychological earthquake. I've applied for 3 jobs this week, Rachel said, showing me her phone with the application confirmation emails, real ones, within her actual qualifications. Dad's financial advisor helped me create a budget based on realistic income expectations. She grimaced. It's not pretty, but it's honest, which is new for me. That's a good start, I said, genuinely impressed by her initiative. I'm not asking you to trust me overnight, she added quickly. I wouldn't in your position. And I'm not asking for money. I don't want to lose my brother completely because of my mistakes. It was the first time since childhood that I'd seen Rachel without her carefully constructed armor of charm and manipulation. The vulnerability felt genuine. And while I maintained healthy skepticism, I also recognized the courage it took for her to approach me this way. We've got a long road ahead, I told her honestly. But I don't want to lose my sister either. 3 days later, I received a text from Dad asking me to meet him for lunch, alone. We met at his preferred steakhouse, where the maitre d' greeted him by name and led us to Mr. Henderson's table in the corner. The first 15 minutes were filled with awkward small talk about sports and weather. Dad ordered his usual scotch on the rocks while I stuck with water, wanting to keep a clear head for whatever was coming. "Your mother thinks I owe you an apology," he finally said after our entrees arrived. I waited, fork suspended over my plate. He cut a precise piece of steak, chewed thoroughly, and swallowed before continuing. "The thing is, I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to be apologizing for. Pushing you to excel? Having expectations? Isn't that what fathers are supposed to do?" I set my fork down. "Dad, you've spent my entire life comparing me unfavorably to Rachel, while she was actually failing at the very things you were praising her for. That goes beyond having expectations." He flinched slightly at the directness. "I never meant to." "It doesn't matter what you meant," I interrupted, surprising both of us. "What matters is what you did. And what you did was make one child feel like they could never measure up while enabling the other to avoid responsibility." Dad's face flushed, and for a moment, I thought he might get up and leave. Instead, he set his knife and fork down with deliberate care. "Did I ever tell you about my father?" he asked unexpectedly. I shook my head. Grandpa Henderson had died when I was very young, and Dad rarely spoke of him. He was a self-made man. Started with nothing, built a successful contracting business through sheer force of will. Dad's eyes focused on something beyond the restaurant. He had one mantra: there's no room for weakness in a Henderson man. Any mistake, any emotion, any deviation from his plan was met with consequences. The implication hung in the air between us. "I swore I'd never be that kind of father," he continued. "That I'd never raise my hand to my children the way he did to me. And I kept that promise." "You did," I acknowledged. "Physical abuse had never been part of our household. But I've been realizing, with your mother's rather persistent help," he added with the ghost of a smile, "that there are other ways to damage your children. Ways that might be less visible, but just as lasting." It was the closest thing to self-awareness I'd ever heard from my father, and it momentarily left me speechless. "I'm not good at this," he admitted, gesturing vaguely between us. "Talking about feelings, acknowledging mistakes. It wasn't allowed in my childhood home, and I've spent 63 years avoiding it whenever possible." "I know, Dad. But I am sorry." The words seemed to physically pain him. "For not seeing you clearly, for not recognizing your success on your own terms, for perpetuating a dynamic that hurt both my children in different ways." The apology was imperfect, still tinged with self-justification, but it was real. And from a man who had never apologized to me for anything in 32 years, it was monumental. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." The conversation shifted to more practical matters: Rachel's job search, her financial situation, and the steps she was taking toward genuine independence. Dad was clearly still struggling to recalibrate his perception of both his children, but he was making an effort I wouldn't have thought possible before the confrontation. As we were finishing lunch, he asked about my company in a way that felt different from his usual dismissive inquiries. He listened actively as I explained our recent developments, asked thoughtful questions about our business model, and even offered some legitimately helpful insights about our expansion strategy. "You know," he said as we waited for the check, "I never understood your technology obsession. Seemed like a waste of your potential. But it appears I was the one who didn't see the bigger picture." Coming from my father, this was equivalent to a standing ovation. The following weekend marked the first family gathering since the confrontation, a Sunday dinner that Mom insisted we all attend. "We need to start rebuilding," she texted me. "And I'm making lasagna, so no excuses." I arrived to find Rachel already there, helping Mom in the kitchen, a rarity in previous family gatherings. She gave me a tentative smile as I entered, which I returned with equal caution. Rebuilding trust would take more than one honest coffee meeting, but it was a start. Dad emerged from his study when called for dinner, and we all took our usual seats, a physical reminder that while much had changed, some patterns remained deeply ingrained. The meal began awkwardly, with Mom carrying most of the conversation. But gradually, something remarkable happened. Rachel shared news of a job interview she had scheduled, not for an executive position, but for a marketing coordinator role that matched her actual experience. Dad mentioned a financial plan he was helping her develop, without any undercurrent of comparison to me. I talked about a new client my company had signed, and everyone listened without dismissal or one-upmanship. It wasn't perfect. Old habits surfaced occasionally. Dad automatically serving Rachel first, Rachel momentarily slipping into her practiced role of family star, me withdrawing slightly when challenged. But there was a new awareness when these patterns emerged, a collective recognition that we were working to change behaviors that had defined us for decades. As I drove home that night, I realized that the family dinner had been, perhaps for the first time in my adult life, just a family dinner. Not a performance, not a competition, not an exercise in maintaining comfortable illusions. Just four imperfect people sharing a meal and trying, however awkwardly, to see and accept each other as we actually were. The process wouldn't be linear. There would be setbacks and old wounds reopened. But something fundamental had shifted in our family system, creating space for a different kind of relationship to eventually grow. 6 months after the dinner that changed everything, I stood in my company's new downtown office, watching as employees filled the expanded space with energy and purpose. What had begun as 3 friends working from my apartment had grown into a thriving business with 63 team members and clients across 4 countries. The success was sweet, but what made it truly meaningful was that I no longer needed anyone else's validation to recognize its value. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Got the promotion. Assistant marketing manager starts next month. Small raise, but mostly just happy to be moving up legitimately this time. I smiled as I typed back, congratulations. Hard work paying off. Proud of you. And I meant it. In the months since our confrontation, Rachel had taken significant steps toward genuine independence. After staying with our parents for 6 weeks, she'd found an affordable 1-bedroom apartment in a less trendy neighborhood. She'd secured an entry-level marketing position at a local company and had been steadily rebuilding her professional reputation through consistent, honest work. No shortcuts, no exaggerations, no dependency on anyone else's money. Just the slow, unglamorous process of earning her way forward. Our relationship had transformed as well. The competitive dynamic instilled by our parents had given way to something more authentic. We met for coffee every other week, and while we weren't best friends, too much history stood between us for that. We were developing a relationship based on who we actually were, rather than the roles we'd been assigned. Remember how Dad used to make us compete for that annual achievement award at Christmas? She'd asked during one of our coffee meetings, shaking her head. God, that was messed up. And you always won. I reminded her with a rueful smile. Because the metrics were designed for me to win, she acknowledged with newfound self-awareness. Academic achievements, social accomplishments, extracurriculars. All the things that came naturally to me but were struggles for you. There was never a category for built a computer from spare parts or created a website at 15. This willingness to recognize the unfairness of our childhood dynamic was perhaps the most healing aspect of our new relationship. Neither of us could change the past, but acknowledging its impact created space for a different future. My relationship with Dad had seen the most surprising evolution. The man who had spent decades criticizing my choices was making genuine efforts to understand my world. He'd visited my office twice, asked thoughtful questions about my business model, and even attended a tech conference with me, sitting through presentations that would have bored him to tears in the past because he wanted to understand what excited me. During one remarkable dinner at his club, after several scotches lowered his usual emotional barriers, he confessed, "I pushed you away from technology because it terrified me. I didn't understand it, couldn't control it. Felt like watching you walk into a world where I couldn't protect or guide you." "You could have just said that," I told him. "Not the way I was raised," he replied simply. "Henderson men don't admit fear." "Well, this Henderson man does," I said. "And it's made me stronger, not weaker." He nodded slowly, absorbing this challenge to his fundamental beliefs about manhood and fatherhood. I'm learning that might be true. Mom had undergone her own transformation, stepping out of her peacekeeper role into a more active voice in family dynamics. When Dad occasionally slipped into old habits of comparison or criticism, she no longer remained silent or made excuses. "Greg, we discussed this," she'd say firmly. And remarkably, he would check himself. I spent too many years trying to smooth over problems instead of addressing them, she told me during a lunch just the two of us shared. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I was really just enabling dysfunction. This Thanksgiving marked a particularly significant milestone. As we gathered around the table, joined this year by Mason and his wife Sarah, who had become friends with my parents through various company events, Dad stood to make his traditional holiday toast. I want to express my gratitude for many things this year. He began in his usual formal manner. For health and prosperity, for good food and good company. Standard dad fare so far. But then he continued, his voice taking on an unfamiliar quality of openness. And I'm particularly grateful for second chances. For the opportunity to see things I've been blind to for too long. He turned to me, raising his glass slightly. Braden, your company's success this year has been remarkable, but more impressive to me has been your integrity and determination. You built something meaningful on your own terms, and I couldn't be prouder. The words I had waited a lifetime to hear from my father were finally spoken, not because I had conformed to his expectations, but because he had expanded his vision to recognize my genuine achievements. Rachel, seated beside me, squeezed my arm gently. There was no jealousy in her expression, no competitive edge, just shared happiness for this moment of recognition. She, too, had been liberated by the truth, freed from the exhausting burden of maintaining a perfect facade. Later that evening, as everyone moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, I took a moment alone in the kitchen, reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. The confrontation had been painful, necessary, but painful. The healing process that followed had been messy and nonlinear, with progress and setbacks in seemingly equal measure. But standing in the kitchen where I'd spent so many holidays feeling inadequate and unseen, I realized how profoundly things had changed. The truth, however difficult to speak and hear, had ultimately set all of us free. Free from pretense and performance. Free from the constraints of assigned roles that had never fit. Free to be imperfect, authentic, and still worthy of love. I had learned that self-worth can't be built on others' approval. It must come from within, from living according to your own values and recognizing your own achievements. I had learned that enabling someone else's false narrative, even with good intentions, ultimately harms them by preventing necessary growth. And perhaps most importantly, I had learned that family relationships, even deeply wounded ones, can heal when everyone commits to honesty and accountability. As I rejoined the gathering, I noticed the easy conversation flowing between my parents and Mason, the genuine laugh Rachel shared with Sarah, the absence of tension that had defined our family gatherings for decades. We were no longer performing the roles of a perfect family. We were simply being a family, with all the messiness and authenticity that entailed. The journey wasn't complete, of course. Old patterns still occasionally emerged. Healing rarely follows a straight line. But we were moving forward together, eyes open to both our shared past and our individual truths. For anyone watching this who recognizes their own family in our story, know that change is possible. Speaking your truth may be terrifying, and the immediate aftermath may be painful, but authentic relationships built on honesty are worth the discomfort of transformation. You deserve to be seen and valued for who you truly are, not for the role you've been assigned in your family system. Have you ever had to confront a difficult family truth? How did it change your relationships? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most meaningful connections. May you find the courage to speak your truth when needed and the wisdom to listen when others speak theirs.